Yeah, I love you. I just met a. You tell me where you want me to go and I'll.
With the introductions. Hello, everyone. It's good to see you all virtually. I am Karen Adler. Thank you all for joining us for this Gutman Library and Harvard Education Press book talk. I'm an acquisitions editor here at Harvard Education Press. And to start, I'm delighted to introduce you all to the participants of this book talk for the third edition of DataWise, Educators Collaborating, so each learner thrives. Let me start with Kathy Boudett, who is a senior lecturer here at Hugsy and the executive director of the DataWise project. She is the co-editor of the previous editions of DataWise, starting with the first edition in 2013. She is also the co-author of subsequent books in the DataWise family, including DataWise in Action, MeetingWise, and SystemWise. Candice Bocala is a lecturer on education here at Hugsy and research director of the DataWise project, and also co-author of the Internal Coherence Framework. We have Richard Murnane, co-editor of the previous editions of DataWise, among other books, and who is the Thompson Research Professor at Hugsy and Research Associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. And we have Liz City, who will be moderating in person. Thank you, Liz, who is a senior lecturer on education, executive director of Reach Every Reader, and previous director of the Doctorate of Education Leadership Program. She is the author and co-author of many books, including the previous editions of DataWise, Strategy in Action, and Instructional Rounds in Education. Let me add personally, it was such a pleasure working with Kathy and Candice on the third edition of DataWise. As someone who is relatively new to the DataWise universe, I can wholeheartedly say that Kathy and Candice are not only incredible writers and thinkers, but also embody the true spirit of collaboration at every step of the book publishing process. It was such a pleasure to work with them. And with that, let me kick off the book talk, and I'll leave it to you all who are in person.
All right, thanks so much. Thanks for coming, everybody. We are going to toss each other some questions to get us started, and then we're going to invite you to ask questions, both those of you in the room with us and those of you on Zoom with us. So be thinking about your questions. I'm going to turn it over to Dick Murnane for the first question. You got to use your mic.
It's always a treat to be together with the three of you. So it's been a joy for more than 20 years to initially be involved in this endeavor and then to watch it grow and develop and thrive. So Kathy, my understanding is that the second edition, published in 2013, has continued to sell well. Why a third edition?
Actually, I think I'm all set with this. Yeah. Well, I feel like this edition kind of almost asked us to write it. Let me see if I turn that's off. Are you guys hearing an echo?
Maybe if you hold it away from here. A little bit.
This, like that? Okay. I feel like this edition almost asked us to write it in the sense that, as you know, Dick, we've been kind of doing DataWise on ourselves ever since we started, thinking about some time that you and Liz and I spend up in that, I think was it room 403 upstairs in this building. And we were talking about what was happening out there in the field with the people that were using DataWise. And we were learning some people were getting results and some people weren't. And that was a kind of upsetting moment, I thought. But we did some brainstorming, collected some evidence, and found out that there were those habits of mind that the people who are being successful were bringing to the work. And once we realized that, we kind of couldn't not write the second edition, because we're like, well, we don't want people out there thinking the 8 steps is all they need to do, right? And I feel like this third edition, it was kind of similar in the sense that we were collecting some evidence. The Candice came on in around 2010.
2009, 2010.
2009, 2010. And Candice and I were pretty surprised when we asked our Harvard students who were taking our DataWise class, which we also offer with to people in the field. And there's a sort of standard question that we ask around is, were diversity issues related to the course content well addressed in this class? And was it 40% of people said not applicable?
Not enough that we were satisfied with.
Right. And so we're like, wait a second. I knew from the time that we spent with Liz and Dick in the authoring process with our 19 colleagues, that pretty much every single one of us was in the room because we cared about each kid getting an equitable opportunity to an excellent education, but somehow that wasn't coming across. And so we ended up just feeling like we need to understand why people don't think of DataWise as a strategy to build more equitable schools. And well, we kind of turned the mirror on ourselves, right, Candice? Do you want to tell a little bit about how we discovered our role in this process?
So I think one of the biggest things that is in this book that's not in any previous book is really putting the idea that improvement work is equity work front and center. This was something that we knew to be a value of the original authors. We knew that, and actually Liz and Dick, you can speak to this, but I do think that we knew that organizing people collaboratively around important challenges related to student learning, that is about equity work at its heart. We have to be understanding who are we not serving well and how do we serve them better? That's an equity question. But sort of putting that a little bit more front and center, and then also naming some places within the improvement cycle that people get stuck. And there's a way to go through the 8 steps and do them very technically, right? Here's a really nice slideshow. Here's a nice set of charts and graphs. Those are the technical things that you need, but what we discovered is you really need to be asking yourself some hard questions when you are giving people data, when you are asking them about what learners are doing and where they're not, where you're not seeing the progress that you want. What are we doing as educators that we're not, we're either doing or not doing to lead to what we're seeing in our students? So the harder questions, right? Those ones about ourselves are the ones that are in this book, and they're up front and center in a way that they weren't in the original versions.
Yeah, and I mean, specifically the way we ended up integrating them. And I feel like at this moment, I just have to give a shout out to Darnisa Amante, who is a certified DataWise coach, who worked with our team for several sessions. She did some in-person work. And one thing she did is she had us put up a big DataWise swoosh. So those of you familiar with DataWise know it's an 8-step process that kind of goes through what you would do to try to improve teaching and learning for students. She put it up on a wall and she was like, where would equity show up? And we started writing in some questions and places along the outside of the swoosh. And you'll see in the new book, that's now what we call the equity halo. And so at each of the 8 steps, there's 1, 2, and sometimes 3 questions that are these hard questions like, whose stories do we tell? How do we create a community where each person is known and belongs? How much are we willing to change? And so once we had that and we had a nice handout, Dick, we had to write a book because we just felt like DataWise had evolved and we wanted to capture that.
Before I ask Candice a question about one of my favorite parts of the book, can you say, just one of you say a little bit more about the halo? I had opened, before you just said that, I had opened to the page where it is in your introduction, because I love it. DataWise is there's a lot of metaphors from nature that emerge from the work itself, which is fun. So say why it's a halo.
You want to speak to that, Kathy? It's the Nautilus.
Nautilus? Sure. So yeah, Liz, when we went from the first edition in 2005 to 2013, that's when we introduced this idea of the curving fern, the koru, which is this symbol in Maori culture that is the sort of new life, new beginnings. And when we saw that, oh my goodness, that koru shape is exactly the shape of our DataWise arrow, we felt like, that's going to convey to people this fractal nature of doing improvement, that you may be doing improvement sort of school-wide, but then within that, you might be doing improvement at each grade level or even in smaller settings. And our efforts to make a picture of that looked kind of goofy because we put all these like data-wise arrows pasted together. And so that was the first time nature kind of rescued us from having a funny image. But with the data-wise halo, we have the questions that go on the outside, and that is kind of like in this curving halo shape. But again, interestingly, we have loads of educators in Australia that do this work. And it was at a time when we were in Australia teaching data-wise, and we showed the halo on the outside, and somebody came up to me with an image of a nautilus shell. You know how it looks when you cut a nautilus shell in half, and there's all those sort of compartments that go around the outside. And oh, I just got a shiver right now, but I got a shiver when I looked at it because I was like, we've been trying to say that the equity questions, if you answer them, that's what makes your data-wise cycle strong. But there was nature with these beautiful kind of arching shapes basically showing us that in order for a structure, sort of this idea of the spiral to be strong, it needs that structure. So when we saw that, we're like, okay, nature came to the rescue again.
I love that. One of the things that if you haven't seen this book, first of all, it is absolutely fabulous. And I can say that because I was not involved except for cheering them on. And it's, when you hear third edition, you might think, oh, they like adjusted a couple things. It is almost a brand new book. It really, really builds off of 20 years of learning. But if you've read one of the previous editions, you have not read this book. So I really recommend that you get it because it has both these equity questions in it, as well as a lot of learning from a lot of people, probably some of whom were in Zoom. Hi. But one of my favorite things that you all added in this edition is stories. You have stories from real people who've been using DataWise. So I know that it takes a lot of work to collect stories. And I hear that you were the one behind this, Candice. So I'm curious, both why did you put them in there? How did you think about it? And I love that the stories have the picture of the person telling the story as well as their own words. So tell us a little bit about why and how behind these stories.
Sure. So I think from the beginning, DataWise actually has always been really collaborative between sort of education, school, faculty, and students, as well as with practitioners. So that was true from the beginning, that we've always gone out to understand what's going on in practice. What are teachers really facing? Where are their struggles? What strategies are they using? What are school leaders facing? So that has always been true. I think what we wanted to do really explicitly in this version was bring some of the stories from our network of DataWise coaches who are out there in the world doing this work directly with practitioners, as well as teachers, school-based instructional coaches, and principals and other administrators to say, can you tell us a little bit about something in this step that might be either hard or messy for you? How you might have dealt with it, because that is the real advice, right? That's when you're a principal and you're thinking, how am I going to get people to share things about themselves, make themselves vulnerable, right? You've got advice in the book from principals who have done just that. The other thing that it allows us to do for the stories is it allows us to focus on some of those harder equity questions that Kathy was talking about before, where we asked our practitioners, can you tell me how you think about measuring what matters? Can you tell me how you think about whether there's a willingness to change in your organization? So rather than us telling people these are the questions that matter, we went out and we asked our network and to tell us, what do you think about that? So what I hope the stories can do is to give people a sense that there are real people out there doing this work. Everybody's listed with their own name and their picture. You know, they gave us permission to use that. So we're not making them up. They're not composites or vignettes. As we all know, we use a couple of those in the book as well, but you know, the stories are actually real people. So we want to, you know, make it clear that this is real work and that it's messy. that there are people out there who, you know, struggle with the same kinds of things related to, again, getting staff to be vulnerable, helping people realize that they are part of a system that has created the outcomes that are going on. So how do we change that? There's some hard work here, and that's, I think, what the stories help us to understand.
Can I just share one thing about stories? So I am fortunate to I have 3 amazing daughters, but 2 of them are teachers. And when I showed them the new edition of the book, my older daughter, who is a teacher, 6th grade English and 6th and 8th grade English language arts teacher, she's like, flips through, gets to the story. She's like, that's what I'd read first. And it was just interesting. Like, she wasn't talking about she might read the whole book that her mother wrote, but she did think she might read every one of the stories. And I thought that was really interesting. And it did make me think about like how people read these days and what are they reading for. And our hope, I think, is that the stories maybe bring in some folks who might not have wanted to go through the narrative first, but maybe we'll loop them into the narrative as well.
Yes, hopefully at some point your daughter reads the whole book.
On that note, a fun thing, I think it's tucked in the introduction, on the like how, yes, it is in the introduction. I love that you all had how to read this book based on your compass points of your preference, sort of just how you like to enter the world, you know, or just go through the world. Like, do you want to read all about the people and the messy parts? Do you want to see what it all looks like? Oh, go read that chapter at the end that shows what it all looks like together. Oh, do you want, like, you like the step-by-step? Okay, well, you know, so I think it's nice too that there are lots of different ways to enter both the book and the work itself, right? You guys have always taught, like, just get going and, you know, you don't march through step by step in some kind of lockstep. All right, Candice, you want to take us back to the beginning?
Yes, so we're going to rewind just a little bit because we're really honored that both you, Liz, and Dick could be here today. And we want to just have you look back for just a moment, Dick, and talk a little bit about why did you convene that first group of educators 20 years ago? This is the 20th anniversary of the DataWise project, by the way, which is amazing. So if you could talk a little bit about who was there? We know it was the Boston Public Schools, but maybe tell us a little bit about that. And what was your vision for what it might become?
I had no vision.
We need to use a mic.
The impetus for me was I had decided to spend a year working with the Boston Public Schools in 2001-2. And I negotiated with the superintendent, Tom Pezon, whom I knew, about what I would work on. And he said, why don't you work on developing software so the school faculties can access information on the students in their schools, including test scores and things like that. So with the help of the Boston Plan for Excellence, I did that. And then, of course, that led to a demand, well, what will the school faculties do with that information? So with the help of a doctoral student, I developed a course and taught that course in a Boston public school to, I don't know, how many school teams were there? 6 or 7 maybe, or?
Maybe, I was going to say 10, but probably was 6 or 7.
Liz was a doctoral student and actually, to my delight, took the course. Kathy was a postdoc interested in working with schools, so she participated. They almost immediately became part of the teaching team. We quickly learned that technical issues like how do you access software were the least of the challenges in doing that work. How do you get people to work together? How do you actually learn from information? And most importantly, once you've learned what students can do and not do, what do you do so that you'll make it better for the students? That turned out to be immensely challenging. We didn't find any resource that provided answers to those tough questions. So we thought, well, we're learning a lot as a group. There were 19 of us, I think. So we got together, started out we wrote a bunch of chapters. We met for a year, made a little bit of progress. The real breakthrough came when I said to Kathy and Liz, please take over. And then within a year, we had a book. And Kathy and Liz and I spent a summer seeing more of each other than we did our partners. working together to take these chapters that were written in with typically each chapter had a Boston public school educator, an HGSE faculty member, and perhaps a doctoral student. They were all interesting, but written in many different ways. How do you make this coherent? So that's what we worked on, and out of that came the first edition.
You're selling yourself a little bit short in terms of the magic, because I feel like only you, Dick, could have convened that group, could have gotten people like Dan Koretz, who's at sort of the head of his field in terms of a psychometrician, John Willett, and, you know, inspire principals like Mary Russo, just getting those people to give. We all know that it's about where are people going to put their mind share? Where are they going to invest time? And the attendance was amazing. Do you remember?
Yeah.
So, so anyway, the idea that you're willing to bring us together, and then I just love this idea of sort of the collaborative modeling that you did, because that's kind of how we roll too, Candice, right? Like, we bring people in. The most exciting new chapter in the book, Candice co-authored with 3 other people. Like, it's not like we hold things tightly, and I feel like you really modeled that for us, Dick. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in on that too, because what I remember from that I think you all have just continued is humility about the work. So I think a big piece of what Dick brought was humility and curiosity. And what was striking to me as a brand new doctoral student, I had just arrived at HGSE from practice, where I had kind of wrestled with as a principal, as a coach in the Boston schools, like, what do I do with data? I don't know, but I'm supposed to be doing stuff. Let me see if I can figure it out. Dick kept like deferring to me as if I had answers he didn't have. And I was like, I don't think I do, but it really made an impact on me. And I think that kind of core value of humility and learning from people who are doing that messy work you talked about, I think that's been part of DataWise ever since. So that's you, Dick Murnane. And embodied by the current leaders.
Well, Liz, I'd like to kind of check in with you about all of the thinking and writing and leading that you've been doing since 2005, when we wrote the first edition. And I know you and I had the opportunity to bring MeetingWise into the world in 2014. And I'd love to sort of ask you about sort of how that came about and what you're seeing of the impact on that, maybe on people who are not doing DataWise. And then I'm going to hit you with something about a more current book that you've got out there.
So MeetingWise, it's funny, we just had on campus last week a group, mostly principals and the superintendents and central office folks from Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. And I was, whenever I'm teaching educators who come to our campus to learn, no matter what the content is, I basically almost always took meetings in there. And it's because I say to people, okay, so how many of you, like the Charlotte group, I was the last thing standing between them and their plane. So I was like, how many of you have meetings on your calendar tomorrow? And they all raised their hand. I said, how many of you are looking forward to all the meetings in your calendar tomorrow? And none of them raises their hand. And so for me, I'm always trying to teach people about meetings, kind of no matter what the thing is that we're trying to get better about, because meetings are where a lot of educators spend a lot of time, and almost everybody thinks their time could be better spent. And to me, it's some of the lowest hanging fruit for how do we start making improvement faster. And unlike, okay, we're going to go through the whole DataWise process and eventually we're going to get somewhere, we're going to get some traction. It's like, oh, I could change this thing in my meetings tomorrow. Like one of the principals in Charlotte was like, she did the MeetingWise checklist and she said, I have mostly yeses, but we don't have roles. And she said, and what do you mean by objectives anyway? And so we were talking about how like different things connected. And she said, well, I can put roles in my next meeting. I said, I think that'll also help with how you say you run out of time for the most important things, because you're timekeeper, so it's, to me, the meetings are this kind of tactical way to embody some of the messy parts of the work. and get some traction right away. So it's been fun to, what the funnest part, I think, since we wrote that book in 2014, or it came out in 2014. And what's fun now is I'll go places and I'll like see people's agendas and they're like, look at my agenda. And it's completely a meeting-wise agenda. And they have no idea that it's a meeting-wise agenda. To me, that is like a great sign of success.
And I mean, I think one thing that's interesting is these harder equity questions, you actually can't tackle them in a bad meeting. Because if somebody's going on, or you're going way over, or it's just not even clear like what the purpose of the meeting is, then you might not take them on. And so I just wanted to sort of publicly thank you for being my sort of meeting partner, because I think it's allowed us to get beyond the tactical to sort of the deeper things. You're about to.
I was just going to say, I often tell people that when we started the DataWise work, people came to us thinking that what they needed was help with using data. But like all three of you have said in different ways, what they actually really needed help with was learning how to collaborate around the things they were trying to improve, maybe with a little evidence thrown in, right? But like the collaboration to make progress, that was the hard part. I think that's why we added MeetingWise into the Pantheon, right? It was just like, oh, we know some stuff, maybe we can help people.
Yeah, yeah. And so I know even though you have a brand new book, just came out, Leading Strategically, this is not sort of about your book, but I was just curious, are there ways in which some of the principles that you talk about in your book, you can sort of see them mirrored in DataWise, and how that might be helpful for people who are trying to just be strategic more generally?
Yeah, I told Kathy not to ask me a question about this since it's about her book, not mine. But anyway, but we've worked together a long time, so of course our ideas, kind of weave together. So I think the Leading Strategically comes out of sort of a similar reason for why you guys wrote this book, which is we're out there, we're working with people, we're trying to help people make progress, and they're getting stuck in the messy stuff, right? The messy day-to-day stuff. So it's like, how do we help people make decisions about the messy day-to-day stuff, right? Ask the right questions. There's a gazillion questions in the Leading Strategically book for the same reason you all added a bunch of questions. Like, questions are key. Right? And that just stance of inquiry and curiosity. I also think but you have to give people kind of a framework to hang things on, And so we have 5 elements of Leading Strategically. 2 of them they're all connected to DataWise, but 2 of them are deeply connected. One is, connected right in the chapter the 3 of us wrote in the 2nd edition, and is still in there in the 3rd edition with some stories and other things thrown in now. Where when we were writing it, I said, I feel like, one of the big things we've learned about improvement is you got to think big, act small. And so we wrote about that in that 2nd edition. And then we wrote about how you have to learn quickly. Well, continue working. So in Leading Strategically, one of the 5 elements is think big, act small, learn fast. And so it's very directly connected with what have we learned about improvement, generally speaking. And I think everything you all do is about think big, act small, learn fast. One of the other elements is called discern. And discern is a lot about how do you pause and how do you figure out both what's our purpose here, and then what problems are we trying to solve, and then what actions are we going to take. And so we have some database stuff in there, but I was like, they just need to read DataWise if they're going to go deep in this. But I think just trying to name a lot of what we have to do is slow down so that we can figure out what matters most here, and then how do we make progress on it. So that's a couple intersecting points. All right, we've talked a while, so now we're going to open it up for some questions. And we can talk to each other all afternoon, but we'd love to hear your questions. Like we said, a lot of the sort of energy, life, and learning of DataWise has been from the field and from hearing what people are learning, what they need, et cetera. So we'd love to hear any questions. Karen's going to help us out in in Zoom, in the Q&A feature, I can see. And in the room, all you have to do is raise your hand. So, all right, we got one right there. And in the room, please use the microphone so the folks on Zoom will be able to hear you. Go ahead.
Congratulations. I love hearing about the stories in the book, and I was wondering if you could share a story of educators using DataWise recently that has inspired you?
Yeah, this is hard.
I don't know. I'm thinking of things. Also thinking of things in Brazil. Should I tell a Brazil story, and then if one jumps out? I had the incredible good fortune to get to go down to Brazil and see some people who are doing DataWise down there. And we went to a beautiful town called Encantado, which at the time had just suffered a tremendous flood. And I don't know if you've been hearing, there's been some really sort of extreme weather down there. And we had made the plan to go visit them. It was going to be quite a drive from Porto Alegre, where Rafael Corman, a certified DataWise coach down there, was driving us from. And I thought, well, you know, are they going to really want to get together and sort of describe their work, given that they're in the middle of this crisis? And he said, yeah, they really want us to come. And so we drove and saw the evidence. I mean, it was one of those situations where it's sort of, the rain had stopped, but it was an ongoing crisis. And we get to a school, and there were all these educators that were there to meet us. They sat in a circle, made us, you know, a delicious kind of coffee breakfast. And I don't speak Portuguese. And most of them didn't speak English, but we talked for an hour. And like, how did that happen? And I mean, Raphael did a little bit of it, but they had learned, like we talk, when we're teaching DataWise in English, sometimes we talk about how we are, we're learning a language that all of us collaborating to improve education can speak to one another, so that we're not speaking past one another and we're actually, you know, making progress towards something. But they, you know, so they had learned to speak DataWise in Portuguese to one another. And interestingly, you know, the words sound pretty similar. And so I would hear them say something that clearly meant, oh, our meetings used to be so boring. And like, and then, you know, they would like make this mark about like how now we capture everything we learn and we have roles. And so there was this beautiful kind of pantomime happening. And then when it got to this idea of one of the things we talk a lot about in the new edition is the importance of grounding in why you do this work. Raphael had them go around and sort of very briefly share their why. And I promise you, I understood every word of everybody's why, because they were like speaking from the heart. It was about kids, it was about colleagues, it was about hope. And it was sort of in that moment that I was like, okay, there's something going on here that's bigger than the four of us, where people in the field are taking ideas unto the, you know, for themselves, for their community, and building on it. So I don't know if that's the kind of story you were looking for, but it meant a lot to me.
I'll tell a really quick one, just a short story, because part of the story is actually in the book. It's Flushing High School in Queens. Again, real high school, real people. We're not making this up. This was a story of kind of how they engaged in DataWise. But I'm going to talk about what they're doing now that we are really excited about, which is they are now engaging students in using the improvement process to improve problems and issues that the students care about. So a big shift, I think, another big shift in this book is the sort of emphasis on understanding and using student voice as data. So how do we go to our learners? How do we understand what they need? And so what was amazing, and our Flushing educators who actually are going to present in our network webinar that is for our coaches, are going to share about engaging students in an improvement process at the high school level. So that was just amazing to hear about. And that's kind of like, I think the next evolution is how do we get kids to do this, right? Routinely as a way of learning and improving at their own schools.
That's awesome. Anytime I've been involved in like an instruction rounds visit or some kind of improvement process where the kids are alongside the educators, it changes it entirely in all beautiful ways.
Yes.
Like it's so good. Oh, that's so fun.
Very excited.
All right. I saw some other hands in here and I think, Karen, do you want to
Yes.
give from Zoom land and then we'll come back to inside the room?
Sure. We have a few questions. We have 3 or 4 questions on Zoom. Let me give you 2 to start. The first is, could you please tell us 1 or 2 best practices to get school-wide implementation of data-wise principles? And the second is a bit different. You talked about working with on the 3rd edition as a way of turning data-wise on ourselves. What have you learned about yourselves as teachers and researchers through this process? In what ways has your own work changed through this process?
Okay, so how do we get started on DataWise? I'm not going to say best practices because I know that you guys are always about continuous improvement. So, how can people get going? And talk a little bit more about the mirror on yourself. So whichever one of those you want to take up first.
I think I'll take the first, how to get started with an easy answer. And it goes back to what Liz was talking about with the meetings and the fact that one of the biggest things that we find both in terms of how can you set people up is having time and space for those teams, whoever it is, teacher team, leadership team, to meet regularly, and then to make sure that those meetings are purposeful and related to whatever the inquiry is that you're doing. I mean, honestly, the amount of time I've heard from educators who say, oh yes, we were supposed to meet about that, but a month has gone by and we haven't met. And so, even just securing the time and the space is an important first step for sure. And then I think once people see that collaborative time can be beneficial and fruitful, they're going to want more of it. They're going to want to say, oh, okay, I can accomplish things with my colleagues. We can change something around here if we look at evidence, if we make some decisions. The more you get sort of that benefit of seeing that something is working when people are collaborating, the more they're going to want to collaborate. So I think it's combining the 8 steps, again, which can look really technical on paper, but if every step is done purposefully and if teams start to see when I do something changes, then they start to say, okay, I'm invested now. I can try something new. I can change something else. So I think that's one way I would say to start off.
I'm hearing collective efficacy. Yeah, Candice definitely brought this concept of collective efficacy to DataWise, and I feel like it's usually you talk about it on the last day, and people are like, yeah, that's what we want, that's what we need.
It's the collective efficacy is the feeling that we as a group have what it takes to accomplish something together. So not just me as an individual, but we as a group. And it's harder to generate, but has really beneficial outcomes.
Yeah.
All right, Kathy, give us a little mirror.
A little bit on the mirror. So, yeah, I mean, I think one thing I'll just say is when we turn the mirror on ourselves around the equity work, at first we were a little bit kind of like, oh, we don't teach this. Okay, well, we've got to teach this. And I remember being in a meeting with you, and I think it was Aaliyah Alamin from the Teaching and Learning Lab here. And I said something crazy like, well, we've got to get this equity thing just like, fix this semester. And I had no idea like that it was going to become like 8 years of work or something. It was so baked in some of the ways that we were thinking about things. There were some practices, some sort of privileging of things that could be easily measured that were happening. There were absolutely some blind spots that we were fortunate enough to have a lot of doctoral students from sort of a variety of backgrounds were able to really hold some mirrors up to me, to our team. And so I guess I just feel like with this question, I need to be really candid that when you turn the mirror on yourself, it's not always pretty. And you may have been doing things for a while, maybe out of thinking you were doing the right thing, or maybe just out of ignorance, but things that might not have been serving all the people you thought you were serving. And that was hard.
But important.
Goes back to that humility too, right? Which is, if we're going to ask and invite people to keep looking at data about other people, Like, we have to be willing to do that ourselves, right? Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay, Victor, Joe, and then we'll go back to Zoomland for questions.
First of all, congratulations to all of you. A quick observation and then maybe a tricky question possibly. So the observation was I was loving when you're comparing leading strategically in the data-wise book, the nature common theme. It reminded me of Asters and Goldenrods and Nautilus, right? The nature theme kind of being in both books. And so that got me sort of thinking about nature. There's certain things that are stable and certain things that evolve over time. I'm curious, to the extent you're comfortable talking about it, with US dynamics changing in terms of how DI and other topics are going, arguably this becomes even more important. What stays at the bedrock of it and what continues to evolve given national discourse?
So I think one of the conversations we had when politically it became harder to say the word equity in certain spaces, we wanted to make sure that our definition of equity was broad. So sort of any kind of looking at different groups based on differences that are, based in a particular kind of identity, socioeconomic status, English learner status, students with disabilities, race, ethnicity for sure, also gender. So we were not saying this is the only way to think about equity because we wanted it to be accessible to many different kinds of audiences, but we know it is politically challenging to use that word. We decided to keep the word. And we decided to keep the word because it was important to our community and the coaches in our network who told us that this mattered to them, that was at the heart of the improvement process. So that was an important conversation and an important decision. So I think in terms of what stays the same, I think our value around the fact that improvement work is equity work is at the heart. How people interpret that, right? What groups, every school district has an idea that we're not serving everybody well, right? There is no utopian school district where everybody is being served well. So what's going on for those students who you're not serving well? That's at the heart of it. And that is going to look different, I think, in different communities. What would you add?
Yeah, and I would say the equity questions in the halo, I feel like there's something about them that to me feels like it may transcend politics, because they're not about, first of all, they're questions. They're not like commandments. It's just like they're asking you, like I'm trying to think of our step 8 question is about like
Benefits, who does not benefit, what do we do? What's our next level of work?
what's our next level of work? And so my hope is that no matter how you're kind of coming into this or what the environment is where you're trying to serve kids, that you could at least ask one another those questions and get to the place of thinking like, all right, why am I even in education? Oh, it's to serve kids, which it seems like that's still true, right? And then asking those questions, I feel like will give a direction to have the important conversations that need to be had.
All right, thank you, Joe, and then we'll go back to Zoomland for some questions.
Thank you, Liz. So I want to say something more than congratulations. I want to say thank you for setting a model of how you actually can make change in the field of education. Because I think too often people have a good idea, they put it out there and they move on. And the idea that you devote 20 years to committing to this idea and getting it circulated and getting it better is really important. It's how you have impact in a way that it doesn't happen often enough in our field. So more than congratulations. And beyond that, I do have a question from I think you'd say a design point of view, which is when I first saw DataWise, Dick was kind enough to show it to me very early on. I was really blown away by the clarity and simplicity of it, the sort of almost algorithmic nature that you can see very clearly how to work. And I would think that as it gets enhanced, and now especially in the 3rd edition, it could be easy to fall into the trap of just adding more and more and covering the sort of clear through line of how you actually do the work. So I'm curious how you protected yourselves against letting that happen.
Great question.
I'm laughing a little because I'm not sure we've quite, I think we have added, to be fair. So I'm laughing because in our professional learning, we also have this problem where we're thinking we have to teach them more and we have to teach them that. But, you know, we've also learned in both of those cases, less is more and simple is clear. I do think that we have kept at the heart the 8 steps of the improvement process. One of the biggest additions was the habits of mind, because again, it's the difference between doing something in a technical way and doing something with a sort of orientation and sort of our values and beliefs around the steps, the technicality of the steps. The equity questions, even though they are different questions, again, I think the orientation around them is let's be reflective about ourselves and let's be reflective about the society that we live in. So I think I'm not sure that we have quite reached that level of simplicity, but what do you think, Kathy?
I had an image of, you know, that very simple arrow, and then it is a bit like a Christmas tree, and you kind of wrap the ACE Habits of Mind on the skirt, and then you put this halo of ornaments on it, and then I see we got Carmen in the room here, who's a co-author of the System-Wise book, which added, they're almost like 4 presents under the tree. They're the system-wise approach. And I'm like, are we done yet with adding things, or is there something else that happens? But I think the word that's coming to mind is coherence, which is a word that Candice really has I mean, she has a whole book on the topic, but also really helped infuse in what we do. And the idea that, you know, if we even go to nature, like you think about a whole, one of these silver ferns, they're like 20 feet tall. And there are a lot of components in terms of there's this stalk and there are these beautiful leaves. And then when it's, you know, going to seed, there's this whole other structure. And then there's the roots, but they all make sense together. And I think we try to at least ask ourselves, if we're bringing something in, does it make sense with everything else? And I feel like so far, the answer's been yes, but we got to hold ourselves to it. Yeah.
So it's a great question though, Joe, and something for us to think about, I think, in the model.
All right, so we're going to wrap up pretty soon, but let's go back to Zoomland and see what questions are bubbling up from there, Karen.
Yes, we have one comment and just one more question. I'll start with the comment, which is participating in the DataWise process in 2014 changed me as a practitioner. Over the past 11 years, I have moved to a national role and been able to engage in schools and systems successfully because of your work and the learning I received from Hugsy. Thank you. Forever grateful for your expertise and your generosity of spirit.
Oh, wow.
Oh, who was that, Karen?
That's Nikki Rafferty.
Oh, thank you.
And now one question. I work with the Boys and Girls Club at first as a tutor and now trying to connect middle school and high school students to careers through a speaker series. How and where has DataWise been used in the US to address negative effects of inequality in schools?
Wow, so many places. So many places. So we have multiple ways to engage in DataWise, which is why it's a little hard for me to pin that down. We have professional learning institutes, both here and on site. We have a network of coaches who go out and do DataWise in their own settings. A couple of notable school districts. Do we want to name a few, Kathy, that have engaged with us over the years? The first one was Boston. So big shout out to Boston. Many of them are in the Northeast, just because I think somewhat due to proximity. Hartford, Connecticut, as well as New Haven, Connecticut, have both had long engagements with us. Prince George's County in Maryland. Where else should I mention?
There's a lot of folks from Rochester.
Rochester, New York, Christina, Delaware. That's just what.
Yeah, and then in Victoria in Australia, there's quite a few schools who have had incredible stories, and Tasmania.
Yes.
Wonderful learning that's benefited all of us in terms of what's happening there. Yeah.
All right, we got time maybe for one more burning question in the room before Dick and I ask them a couple questions to close us out. Anything you really want to ask? You got Kathy and Candice here. All right, Dick, I'm going to turn it over to you to pitch our next to last question to wrap up here.
Oh, you've done so much. So Candice and Liz, Candice and Kathy, you've done so much over the last 20 years. How about the next 20 years? What happens next?
I'm going to go back to my students doing data-wise. I just, I'll pick up on that. And the more we can learn about what that looks like and helping educators, use the improvement process to better the learning of their students and get the students involved in bettering the learning for themselves at schools. I think that would be amazing if we could get to a book that centers that.
Mm.
Maybe the kids could.
Maybe the kids could help write it too.
That would be great. You heard it here. This is the next project.
Yeah, I love that because I feel like there was a very pivotal moment where Candice and I were invited to go to the Scaling for Impact professional learning program that Monica Higgins and Keith Collar and Jim Honan were doing. And when we were there, we learned about all these dimensions of scale. So those of you who've read Cynthia Coburn and Christidi, I think if they talk about are you scaling for depth, or are you scaling for spread? Are you scaling for sustainability, shift in ownership with evolution is the last one. And I feel like your example of what if the next 20 years means that we're having students sort of take this on, that's really evolution so far beyond what we thought it was in 2005 when we were so proud. Like, that's our book cover, by the way, from 2005, and that's the new one over there. But we thought we had created something and then it's grown. And I feel like I would love to see the field tell us, continue to tell us what's needed next.
Awesome. Okay, we have one last question, but I'm thinking maybe we should do a book commercial before the last question. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Kathy's looking at me like, no, it does not make sense, Liz. Why don't you just ask the last question?
Commercially, but you're going to say that people should buy the book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Book commercial. You should buy the book. You should. It is beautifully written and so helpful. Honestly, I mean, I think to Joe's question about how do you hold simplicity while you've got all this complexity, right? I mean, I think that's what you all do really well in the book, which is to just capture a lot of nuance and messiness and reality, but also give people lots of ways to make progress. So highly recommend this book. And there's a QR code. I love that people in the room are using it, but there's also a discount code, 30% off, and for one more month. So there you go. So you can get it from Harvard Ed Press. I also happened to look on the publisher that shall not be named, or book, I don't know what you call them, Amazon. I looked on Amazon this morning and it's on there too and other places. So if you're like, I need my click, I'm done, it's there too, but not for 30% off. So your choice. Okay, book commercial done. All right, so last question. All this work you've done with educators, what is giving you hope right now?
I always love hearing about, so back to collective efficacy and back to the idea of efficacy in general. What gives me hope is when we use a process, we teach people this process, and they say, I didn't know that I could do that. And guess what? I tried it and something is different now. And it's because I changed something about what I did, right? I wasn't just standing there and waiting for the world to change. I was actually making changes in my own teaching or my own leadership. And I've seen the results of it, and now I want to do it again. So that to me gives me hope that people are actually taking and learning some of these tools and benefiting from them and wanting to do more with improvement. That always makes me really happy.
I think that one thing that's giving me hope is I feel like there's an openness among the educators I'm talking with to believe, to change their expectations for what kids can do. And I think some of that happens when you kind of raise the bar on yourself, which means maybe now you're asking for a more challenging activity, you're figuring out how to do that, and then the kids meet the challenge. And I feel like it's almost making me think of when we were writing the meetings book, And we're like, oh, it's just so depressing that like people are having all these terrible meetings and they're wasting all their time, right? But the flip side of that was, but if they had better meetings, like there's just so much room for improvement, right? And I think there's a lot of room for improvement in how much we believe our kids can do. And so I feel like if that's matched with people who are willing to give kids the rich kind of learning experiences that really tap their brilliance, I feel like we could be entering into a really exciting time in education.
I love those visions from both of you. I want to thank the Gutman Library staff who put all this book talky thing together. So thank you, team, and want to give extra appreciation and shout out to Kathy and Candice on their new book. So thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Dick, for helping
Yes.
us to moderate today.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here and online.